Today is the second day of this August-September 1984 7-day retreat. We will continue with the koan we worked on yesterday. Which is entitled Joshu's Wash Your Bowl. Before going on with that, something is just occurring to me right now, which has been brought up in meetings. Since in recent months meetings have grown longer in time, several people at times during this and past retreats have mentioned to me that they're wondering whether I'm putting it into my own words, there's something wrong with their having a shorter meeting than other people. And often it happens that while sitting in the waiting line, one will begin to think of something to say so that this meeting has an adequate length, commensurate with the length of other people's meetings. There is no need to think of anything to bring into a meeting. If there is a question or something one wishes to bring up, that's one thing, but one doesn't have to prepare anything to bring to the meeting. It's not called for. Also, length of time is of no intrinsic significance or value, except that if one needs time to go into something together, then that's one thing, but there's no comparative value, higher value to a longer meeting and a lower value to a shorter meeting. Something can be communicated instantly. May not need any time, any length of time. Or there can be a communion, if you wish to use that word, without words, which has nothing to do with lengths of time. And yet it is worthwhile, very worthwhile, in a retreat in which everything can come under this magnifying glass of observation, to see how the mind does work in comparison almost all the time. My meeting is longer than the other person's, and then what the comparison does often feeds an image. It always feeds an image. One can check on this, whether this is so or not. Because why would I compare myself or my meeting with someone else's if there wasn't an image involved? Either this is better or worse, superior or inferior, or the uncertainty of the image, am I as good as others if my meeting is short? What can I do to make it longer? All of this coming out of comparison and involving thinking, weighing, measuring. And where in this is attention to what's here, what's sitting here right now? Weighing, measuring, comparing. Can that itself light up, meaning be seen into? It can when one isn't so totally fused with the content of one's comparisons or thoughts. And then the attention is the same whether comparison comes into view is seen for what it is, what it does, what its consequences are, or listening to the trees swaying in the wind. It's the same kind of attention, which does not judge or condemn or defend. And yet don't take these words as meaning, Toni says, I shouldn't condemn, I shouldn't judge or justify. No such thing has been said. If there is judgment, can it light up, be seen, come into awareness? As such, what is it? It's separate, it's separating me from you, or me from an image, from an ideal image I have of myself. I'm not living up to it. I'm bad. It's conditioning at work. All of it so intensely worthy of attention. Of seeing, of taking note of. I don't mean writing it down. Seeing it and then dropping it, washing the bowl. Be free of it so that the vision and attention may be clear for the next moment. If it isn't clear, I didn't say it should be clear. If it isn't clear, what's in the way? What's happening this instant? For doing this kind of work, it is not helpful to read a book on it. Well, it may be helpful up to a point, just as it may be helpful up to a point for someone to point things out. But seeing and understanding has to happen in oneself, as one reads the book of oneself. So many people have told me over the years how unhelpful it has been, that one has read so much and so much over and over, so it has become so deeply ingrained in the mind. Mind has become conditioned according to this book or that book or a whole number of books, and sort of clutters or hazes over seeing what actually happens, not according to any book, but as it happens, here, within oneself. Usually we can muster much more interest in reading books about the human mind than in reading the human mind, because there's fear involved and pain, threat, anxiety, or clinging. And yet no one can do it for us. Either one does it or one sticks to thoughts about the mind according to what one has read. This koan from yesterday read something like this. A monk asked Joshu, I've just entered this monastery. Please instruct me. And Joshu asked, have you had breakfast? Yes, I have. Then wash your bowl. Maybe we'll get to the verse later on, so I don't need to say it right now. But we did get into quite a lengthy discussion yesterday about work. One thing I remember was talking about relationship during work with one another. Taking the case where there is inevitably someone who takes instruction and someone who gives instruction, someone who supervises and someone who carries out instructions given by the supervisor. And depending on where one finds oneself, maybe at times in one of these functions, at times in the other, maybe always in one or always in the other, can one look whether self-image comes in? If the work goes smoothly and there's no resistance, then often there's no need to look. One has no problems. It doesn't mean that there's no self-image. One may have a firmly ingrained image as a servant, a server, and finds satisfaction in that role. I'm saying this just to point out that one must never take for granted that there's no self-image involved in one's relationship with work or with one another, but to look, to test whether it is there or not. It does reveal itself if one looks openly, undefendedly, non-defensively. If there's difficulty in taking orders or being given instruction, what is it that smarts or rebels or smolders, feels hurt? One need not look merely inwardly. If one does look inwardly, one will find most of the time, you don't have to believe what I say. Please look for yourself. It is so utterly important that this be clear. Because if it is not clear, we're in constant tension at work and in relationship, constantly paying back or having little or large vendettas or justifications. You know what goes on. So, looking inwardly, one may discover that there is an image of being someone that needn't take orders from anyone, or someone that gets hurt as a pride. One feels lack of respect. And maybe there is lack of respect in the way instruction is given. What is said here is not bow and serve or take whatever comes toward you in ways of instructions and use all this. The harsher it is, use it, the better for your ego attrition. A very dangerous game that is often played among human beings with each other. If you feel there's an injustice, it's your ego rebelling. And then thinking and looking is atrophied, is stymied, becomes too threatening, because if I look, I may be enhancing ego, whatever that is. Just as clearly as one may look into oneself and see image hurt, a hurt image, one may also see in the one who is giving orders or supervising the need to fulfill the image of being a supervisor, someone in control, someone in power. And the clearer one is within oneself about image and the lure of power, the satisfaction of giving orders, because even though one takes orders, one would very much love to give them oneself most of the time. The clearer all of this is, the easier relationship becomes, because one doesn't fight out of blindness, out of the blindness of ignorance, but one responds from understanding the power of images to hurt or to wish to feed itself, to aggrandize itself at the expense of others. So rather than feeling hurt by a person who may be in the process of doing that, one sees where she or he is coming from, and it may be possible then to speak about it. May not be possible, but one can always try. And the less of an axe one has to grind, the less that one's words come out of hurt and wanting a remedy. Now, what is the word? Wanting sort of wanting to be reinstated in one's image. The less that plays a part, the easier the words come, and the easier they may be heard by the other person. If words come out of hurt or anger, they're just heard as angry words, and it's difficult to glean the substance from angry words. What is he or she really talking about when one responds so habitually to anger by protecting oneself or shouting back? Something else which maybe wasn't mentioned yesterday: if one is criticized and one can go beyond the hurt, if attention is there, freely flowing, freely there, even before a person criticizes one may not even get hurt. But if there's little attention, or one was so happy with what one had been doing, there was a satisfaction with it, and then boom comes the criticism, there's bound to be hurt. But it's never too late to look, to open it up. Maybe one can't, at the moment of being hurt, talk to the other person, that the words wouldn't come out right, but one can look at any time. And if the hurt doesn't predominate, and the reactions that the hurt demands, namely protection, defense, or hurting back, because deeply ingrained in us is this eye for an eye and tooth for a tooth principle, already put down in the Bible. If one is not totally consumed by the hurt, one has allowed oneself to feel it, be in touch with it, understand what it is that hurts, then one may even be free to look at the criticism and see whether there's something in there that one can learn from. Whether, I could do that differently. He's right, or she's got something there. One is free to change something, because one doesn't need to be identified with what one did. It's just something that was done. But we immediately invest ourselves. I haven't talked about that either. We become our work. And then somebody criticizing the work criticizes me at the same time. Why do we do that? We do it. That's a fact. Is it inevitable? Absolutely necessary? Unchangeably so? I would never commit myself to any such assumption. I would want to look and test it out. Whether it's possible to sever this identity. If I'm not identified with an image of myself, rather see it as what it is an image, memory, ideas, past training, and it's not necessary. Many people say it is necessary to have a good self-image. But if one goes into that carefully, closely, not immediately jump to conclusions, but examine it, maybe over a period of time, often what people who say it's necessary to have a good self-image, what they're really saying is it's very detrimental to have a bad self-image. Because depression and low self-esteem and low energy are the causes or consequences of a bad self-image. But then to jump to the conclusion and say one has to have a good self-image in its place is completely untested. Because a good self-image is not just as enclosing and subject to hurt, pain, defense as a bad one. It's both images. And why does one need any? One can ask that question. I'm not saying you shouldn't have any, but can one question it deeply by observing the action, the consequences, the whole what an image does to one. And one may find here, maybe there are moments in a retreat where there's particularly intense self-examination and energy gathering in that it's perfectly possible to move, sit, work without any image. And the question still remains, what about in daily relationship? Because relationship here is not what it is in daily life. We're not talking to each other. It's very relatively easy here to walk undefended. In daily life, it's much more difficult, takes much more attention and willingness to test this all out in relationship. I've gone off of a point I was trying to make, which I don't remember now. The freedom to see whether the criticism has something, which can only happen if one isn't identified with what one does and therefore defends it to the hilt, or feels personally threatened if something that one did comes under scrutiny. Do you see how if one has a job where one's work does come under scrutiny all the time, if one is constantly deeply invested in that, and people do take the liberty to criticize, put down what one has done, compare it to what other people do, one is in a constant state of hell. constantly hurt, constantly needing to defend oneself, constantly afraid for one's future in the company or at the workplace. All due to self-image. I wouldn't say all due. There are often other factors that come in, but this is a very central one. Now you may say, if I'm not identified with what I do, won't I work sloppily? Isn't this what is needed to really work to a great degree of excellence? This is what is said. I remember coming to this country and hearing people say there wouldn't be any work done if there wasn't profit made. That human beings will only work if there's a profit in it for them. When I took Economics 101, that was one of the theses of the book. No one questioned it. It was political propaganda in the economics book as well. Even though it was supposed to be a scientific book. I don't know whether economics is very scientific. Do human beings only work if there's profit, if one identifies with the product of one's work? That has to be tested out. Whether doing something for its own sake and the attention given to it, seeing it come into being, whether this isn't its own deep satisfaction, without profit or without immediately identifying with it. Neither immediately nor later, no identity there. Just the doing of it and the love of it. Is it possible? We've gone on to talk about motive for work. And people have, over the years, brought this problem up. Is this the garbage truck?
They're moving the outhouse. Looks like they're moving the outhouse.
They're moving the outhouse. Talk time is usually a favorite time for the garbage truck to come around. Maybe not a bad time to haul it all away. This is what people, not all people, but any number of people have brought up during meetings or coming to talk to me in the office. I want to do something that is a contribution to the world, that is meaningful in the face of what is happening in the world. I'm deeply touched and agonized by the sorrow in this world, and I want to contribute to writing it, to setting it right, or to at least to help out with world problems. And then very often comes the tremendous dilemma of where is one to start? Because one cannot be everywhere. One cannot be with all the starving people in the world. There, as I've read and heard, quite a number in this country, people who don't have enough to eat. One can't be with all the political movements to stop or freeze nuclear armament. One can't be in all the war scenes to help with the wounded. Can't be at all the earthquake sites to help with the disaster there. Can't be with all the women. It's coming more and more into the news how women are brutalized by men and how children are brutalized by mothers and fathers. Where is one going to start with this enormous wave of human antagonism, strife and destruction, mutual destruction, including the poverty, starvation? What work can one do to contribute? Contribute what? A tiny measure of order to this abysmal disorder around one? And is it only around one, or is it also within one? Can one get away from that question? The question where strife, conflict, disorder, disharmony, anger, greed takes its start. And where is one's laboratory to test that out? Over there in the others who seem so ignorant, or maybe in oneself, who may be just as ignorant. On the smallest scale, in an office, on a construction site, in a hospital, in a business, in a shop, everywhere human beings meet. Is one related to each other in a more than cursory way? Cursory meaning doing what needs to be done and yet not in touch with each other and with oneself. And if a relationship in depth, meaning with maybe here and there a spark of genuine love meaning not wanting something back for what one does, not wanting to be recognized or appreciated, or flattered or rewarded, just being in touch with oneself and each other and this very beautiful earth around us. Could that be the first step in contributing to our immense world problems? Or asking the question in reverse, can we contribute as long as we're enabled to relate lovingly, understandingly, and probingly with each other on the smallest scale, in a family, with one's husband, wife, children, parents, at work. And can one learn firsthand, not secondhand through books, but firsthand, through observing, honestly, without images, how one should be or how the others should be? Could that be the first step? To find out about relationship on the smallest scale? And in the process, they're coming to be a relationship, which has nothing to do with the pay that one gets for it. Or the power one may derive from it. This is outside of reward or power. Reward or power are the corrupting elements in human relationship. Some of the corrupting elements. Because one always wants more and more reward and more power to make up for the years of powerlessness and helplessness that we've all gone through in our childhood. So is there any specific place of work at which one can specifically contribute to world problems, or is any place a potential place for clearing, ordering, and allowing understanding, intelligence, and love to bubble up, to spread? How far one does not know, with what effects one cannot imagine. Because the magnitude of it and the effect of it could so easily become ulterior motives again, toward which one works, and in that not being with the greed for success that is so ingrained in all of us. A lot of success or a little bit of success. Can one start freshly any moment at work or here, sitting? Right now we're sitting here, to see motives and therefore not be ruled, tyrannized by them. To see it has to be seen. One cannot say I'm done with it, or it's impossible for me to see them, or impossible for me to get rid of them, or what would I do without them? It's all up for looking and testing, examining. And one may find that one does sit down with a motive. One wants peace, enlightenment, this or that. But very quickly, one can find that the wanting is the powerful drive, and one can question what wanting is. And is it possible to sit and question free of wanting a result? If the power of wanting is felt, and one isn't stuck to what one wants, the image or the object, the idea of what one wants, but one is now with this whole movement of wanting. What happens? One has to see. If one doesn't want to get rid of it because one already thinks it's bad to want something, she said something like that today. So how can I get rid of this wanting? Or if I get rid of the wanting, then I may be free. Then one is still engaged in imaginary goals and shoulds, and not really just face to face with the power of wanting and questioning it to its very root. What is it? Where does it come from? Listening to it or feeling it, being that, whichever way you want to put it, it is a non-dual process if there's no judgment involved. No wanting to get rid of or clinging to it. Then what is it? And if there's a moment of clarity, with no self-consciousness, not I am clear now, that is an idea, an afterthought. There may have been a moment of clarity, but then thought wants to take it over and represent it to itself. I'm clear, and with that clarity is gone, and thinking takes its start again. Does one see that? Or is one now convinced one is a clear person? This is the second interpretation that can be given this koan, where Joshua asks, have you eaten your rice? And the monk says, yes, I have. Rice, in the country where this koan originated, so I've read and been told, stands not just for food to fill the stomach, but for the very nourishment of life, the very essence of life. Without rice, the people would starve and die. With rice, they live and grow, have families and children. And the whiteness of it, whiteness for so many people being a symbol of purity. Wholeness. So the question, have you had your rice, could be asking this newcomer, is it clear? Do you understand? Have you had an insight? Are you enlightened? But Joshua doesn't ask, are you enlightened? He says, have you had your rice? And the monk says, yes, I have. And he may not just be referring to the breakfast that he's just eaten. Remember, we were saying yesterday, he goes right up to the teacher, he's just arrived. No inhibitions, maybe no mystical teacher image there, somebody very remote, on an enormous stage of development, far hard to reach, or dangerous to come close because he may be firing a Dharma question. Or he walks right up and asks whether he's had his rice. He says, "Yes, I have." And Joshua says, "Then wash your bowl." And it says the monk had an insight at this moment. Into what? It doesn't say. One has to look into oneself. When one thinks one has got it, whatever, one did a good job, and then one is identified with it. One is the good worker or the successful person, the terrific this or that. At that moment, it already has become an image, a representation in the memory to which one clings. Do you see that? It's not the work itself anymore. It's not the insight itself. It's a picture, an idea. And when Joshua says, "Wash your bowl," meaning drop it, there's an insight. There's not a hurt. Oh, he didn't acknowledge me. Didn't say how glad to have somebody here who understands. He says, "Wash your bowl." Drop it. And remember, we were talking about it yesterday. Anyone, and I'm sure everyone here, has washed out rice pots. Instant rice is easy. It goes off easy. But ordinary rice, which is cooked and simmered for 40 minutes, it takes great sensitivity of the fingertips to discover all the little humps there that are still left in the pot. Insight into the humps, the obstructions. The being somebody and the fence that constitutes around oneself. A fence that prevents relationship and that causes hurt and defense. Time after time, always new. If there's no insight and no dropping it. In the verse, Mumon says, because it is so very clear, it takes so long to come to realization. What happens when you hear a phrase like that? Because it's so very clear, it takes so long to come to realization. Personally, I never talk about coming to realization, but here is this verse and it's being quoted. Isn't something immediately set up in the mind from here to there, and the time it takes? And either the willpower, mustering the willpower to get there and to make it, or the despair, I can never make it, it takes too long, I've already been at it too long. All of this arising in the mind and affecting, obviously, the body. Our thoughts affect our bodies, either buoying the body with energy or deflating it. That's just one effect. When one looks a little bit closer at this sentence, one finds something doesn't quite make sense. Because it is so very clear, it takes so long to come to realization. What is the cause and effect relationship here? Or is this being turned topsy-turvy? Because insight, understanding, clarity has no cause. No matter what anybody may say. In order to offer a method to get there, has no cause. It does happen on its own, as it were, is one way of putting it. If one is concerned with all of this that we've been talking about and have been talking about time and time again. Concerned, looking, questioning, or just attending. Even without raising a question, attending without knowing, listening, feeling, without having an answer. The mind in a state of open not knowing, undefended not knowing. Seeing defense as it comes up. The verse goes on and says, if one sees at once that light is light, the meal has long been cooked. If at once one sees that light is light. If in the morning one walks out to the lake as the sun comes up over the clouds or the hill, there it is. As it comes up, there it is. As it peeks through a cloud, there it is. There's no belief necessary. It's there. And seeing it and the sun there, are those two things? That's something that can be looked into. If I wish it be there all the time, I could remember it, I could take a picture of it, then there's very much me there and very little sun. But if there's no desire to hold on to it or to make something out of it, to interpret it, nothing, just that, then there is no two. And no need for any belief imposed upon that. And no preparation. Because that's what the next line says. Then the meal has long been cooked. A meal that has long been cooked doesn't need to be prepared. It's ready to eat. So in doing this work on the mat, is one preparing for something in the future? For future realization or whatever? Or is one just facing what is without any belief, just being in touch and dropping it, moving on, one knows not where? In working this way, energy gathers because it is not invested in striving, willpower, forcing. Or running away. We will end here for today.